I think you should.
Yeah, okay. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for giving up your valuable time to share this hour and a half workshop with us. You will all be aware of the roadmap to recovery, which was issued on Monday of last week. And the repercussions have been going around the industry very quickly ever since. Within Constructing Excellence, we believed it was important to align the roadmap to recovery to the construction client commitments best practice guide, because we thought this was a real opportunity to ensure that the client commitments aligned to the, if you like, most appropriate document that's currently in play within the construction industry. So the first thing we did, we went back to our good friend Rob Knight of Igloo Regeneration. Rob was chair of the Construction Clients Group at the time they were last revised in 2015. And I'm delighted to say that Rob is going to be giving a short overview of the background to those commitments. We're also going to be joined by Stuart from Bays, who's going to give us an indication as to the roadmap to recovery. But then, most importantly, we're going to put you all into breakout groups. I hope you've done some background work, some homework ahead of this workshop, and that you'll be able to participate. We've got a facilitator in each of the 6 groups. I won't go through them in detail because Rob's going to do that, but I'll be leading a workshop on design quality. Melissa, one on commitment to people. Andy Brown's health and safety. Paul on sustainability. Mark on procurement. And Howard on client leadership. And you will have been allocated one of these groups. So when the time comes, we'll pop you into those groups and ask you to have a look at the client commitments as they stand, the roadmap to recovery, and then make your recommendations as to where changes need to be made. Because we all know that everyone is equal in life, but some are more equal than others. And we really do need the clients to be informed and educated in terms of driving the changes. Without further ado, I think what I'm going to do now is hand over to Rob, who's going to take us through a few slides in terms of the background. Thanks, Rob.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Slightly strange to be given a presentation on Zoom. It says I'm muted now. Hang on. Sorry, can you hear me, Andrew? It says I've been muted.
No, we can hear you, Rob.
I can hear you. Yeah.
We can hear you.
Okay. I thought you did like what I was saying already. Yeah, so anyway, I just thought it might be useful to spend sort of 10 minutes or so just giving you a little bit of background, firstly to the CCG, so you can understand who we were and why we did the commitments. And also to give you a little bit of context around the time that we took the decision to create the commitments, so that you can see how relevant it is that you're actually looking at it again today, really, because it's almost like a playback, really, of what's happening. And just looking at some of your challenges ahead. So what I'll do is I'll look at, give you a brief intro, and look at the other thing, of course, is it might be worth just considering how you're going to implement this, because this was one of my big challenges at the time. There's one thing producing the commitments, but very little use if nobody's ever going to use them. So I'll give you a little bit of background to that. So this effectively was the CCG leadership time. I was a member of the construction clients group from around about 2008 until 2015. So I was there for most of this, and I chaired it from 2011 to 2015, and had a very strong leadership team, which you can see in front of you. But also we constructed a very strong board as well, which gave us a really good spread of talent and experience across the client industry. I'll give you some of the, these are some of the key organizations that were members of the construction client group, and you can see this is not all of them, but you can see there's some significant clients represented on the group, and of which a number of them were either represented on the board or were supported the board very well. We also had representations in all of those organisations as well. So all of the work we did was directly linked up to, you know, for instance, the CIOB, the HSE, Construction Sales, Constructors. But we were also members of but by being with the Construction Clients Group, we had a place on the Strategic Forum for Construction at the time. And so we were part of the team in 2006 that worked with the Strategic Forum in order to create the construction commitments for 2012. So you can see just a bit of background. So the purpose at the CCG was really to provide a platform to enable construction clients to create an environment and leadership for industry improvement, because we always felt that, you know, whilst we ask the industry to you know, to perform, you know, we had to provide the leadership in order for them to do that, but also enabling clients to obtain best value from their investments in the built environment. And at the time, you'll see with my next slide, I'll put it into context of what was happening around that time. But you can see here some of these have been the UK construction industry improvement reports, and you know, I won't talk about obviously constructing the team and rethinking construction, because obviously those have always been the core principles behind everything Constructing Excellence and the Construction Clients Group did. The key ones that really I'll just focus on now are the one in the centre there, which was the 2012 construction commitments, and also Construction 2025. Now, initially, the purpose of the construction commitments was to try and, which were produced in 2006, were to try and provide some focus on mainly the Olympic Games in 2012, but also it was very relevant to everyone else. But it was very much aimed at the construction industry in order for them to drive the key principles. But in circa 2012, 2013, the government was starting to look at the construction strategy for 2025, which was when we felt at the Construction Clients Group that, you know, whilst this existed for the industry, there was very little in the way of guidance for clients at the time. And so what we went about doing was to, I'll just talk a bit about the thinking at the time, because I think it's relevant now. So we felt strongly that there should be a set of construction clients commitments which reflected you know, the construction commitments at the time. So it wasn't about going away and recreating all of the headlines or anything. It was really putting the flesh on the bones of what existed. But key to this was the implementation. So what we did at the same time as producing the client's commitments, I set about with the group establishing a client umbrella group, because what I felt was that whilst we had a representation with the CCG, we needed to somehow get to 80% of construction client spend within the industry. And the only way we were going to do that effectively was to form an umbrella group with other client procuring bodies. So I had a number of meetings with you can see the group there, the British Property Federation, the Government Construction Board, Infrastructure UK Client Group, the Local Government Association, and a number of retail clients. And whilst that didn't capture all of the clients, if we could get all of those to commit to implementation of the clients' commitments, then at least we were singing off the same hymn sheet when we were procuring the industry, because there's no little point if sort of only 20% of the industry is doing something. So we also were represented within the Construction Leadership Council. So, you know, we worked alongside them to produce this. And we, as I said before, we sat in the strategic forum. So having then pulled together this umbrella group, we had the commitment then that, you know, what we produced would be rolled out significantly. So we then went about in producing the client's commitments, as you'll have all seen. But again, so yeah, sorry, my phone's ringing. Yeah, what we did was we didn't seek to change the key principles, as I said before, but we stuck with them. But what we seek to do was to turn them into a client guide. So if you go through each of the key points, you'll see that what we focused on is what does each principle include? What are the benefits to you as a client? How do you do it? Challenges for your supply chain partners, the steps that you should take, and also where you could get further guidance and advice. Now, again, to us, it wasn't about putting out the commitments and letting everybody run away, because we recognize that within the client world, there are regular clients and there are irregular clients. Some are very informed, some are less informed. So this was about using the experience-informed clients to help out the clients which were less informed and were probably procuring either for the first time or, you know, had, you know, less experience in doing so. So we, alongside it, you'll see here, is we had an action plan, which was effectively how to implement these amongst the your supply chains, how to measure performance, checking behaviours on the projects, auditing yourself, and then you're looking at performance improvements throughout. And we at the CCG would help with that at each stage if somebody needed it. So we then set about producing obviously the client commitments, and you can see here, I won't go through every point, but the key one to us was clearly client leadership. And we sort of fleshed out the things that we needed to consider at the time. So things like leading by example, understanding value is important, engaging competent people, and creating the environment, because we were in control of that. You know, commitments to people, again, using supply chain partners and that value the people that work with them, and also trying to feed in how we can engage the local community with training and development, equal opportunities, and so on, were key to what we were trying to achieve here. Design quality, we were looking to encourage clients to select designers on ability and quality, not lowest fee, and also to focus on whole life value, performance requirements, standardization, prefabrication, offsite manufacture, and modern logistics principles. So again, all very relevant to today. Procurement and integration, picture for you there, Melissa. You'll recognize that one. What we were focused on procurement was transparent decision making, using fair payment policies, trying to set up non-confrontational mechanisms to manage out disputes, fair employment practices, all the things basically that we as clients are in control of. So there's nothing in these guides that we weren't in control of and we couldn't influence in some way. So sustainability, and again, these were the key themes that fed into the commitments. So again, looking at employment, training, local community engagement, enhancing local environments, and so on. Terminology has changed. Like nowadays, there's it's more referred to as social value, and so on. So again, one of the themes you might look at. But you can see there, all of those things were things that we could control. And health and safety was about making sure that the projects were set up in a particular way. Making sure that you had you set up the project and the resources that were necessary in order to provide a proper well-run site. So those were the 6 commitments. But what we did, and so I've explained how we rolled them out. But there was a particularly good example at the time of how an organisation had taken these client commitments very, very seriously, as we found out later, and used them in order to inform their delivery strategy for the whole of their estate. That was Imperial College London, and so they understand that they had a huge estate, effectively, that were a number of things. So what they did is, as their starting point, is they took the construction clients' commitments, and basically amongst the team there, they put in champions for each of the themes, and you can see. Again, you can see on the bottom left of the screen there, you can see they'd actually taken out each of the themes and put a team between them to analyze what the commitments actually meant to them as a business at Imperial College London, and how they needed to flex them and how they needed to work with them. So we completely got that people wouldn't follow them absolutely, but utilize them in the way that suited their business. And as such, then you can see that this was one of 20 pages on the right. This was their action plan that came directly out of the client commitments. And they were happily implementing this one, very successfully on the scheme. And they, one day I had a strategy workshop for the board, and Imperial College were very proud to tell us how they'd gone about this and how it had worked for them. But we also saw other organisations like the HCA, for instance, adopted it in parts. And I've been on the receiving end of questionnaires from organisations where they've asked us about our commitment, our approach to the client commitments as well, which has been very helpful over the years. So at least it shows that people are using them. So I suppose that takes us up to where we are now, and you can see that there are a number of parallels with where we were before. So before we were focusing on construction strategy 2025, now we're actually trying to reboot the construction industry again, and it's similar challenges. So I had a look through the commitments before this call today, and it's really interesting how many of them are absolutely valid today, but some of the terminology has changed. And so I just sort of very quickly plucked out some of the terminology under some of the headings. For instance, for instance, in today's world, we hear a lot more about social value, net zero carbon, and I've put there, and we hear very little about upfront carbon. It seems to, all the focus seems to be on carbon in use, but obviously the construction industry plays a massive part in the carbon that goes into the materials, and also constructing the schemes in the first place is how the industry can deal with that. Soft landings was always a good idea, but rarely talked about, and how you use energy in use. Also the circular economy. Looking at how materials are designed into buildings and how they can be reused at the end of the building's life. So those were just some of the ideas. Within design quality, we did have a number of references to off-site modern methods, but they seem to be gaining traction at the moment, which is absolutely appropriate. And health and safety, the themes that we're hearing now are themes around mental well-being, which we picked up well-being before, but it may need to be more focused. And also we've seen improvements in fire regs and the way we approach things through the tragedy at Grenfell. So, you know, those are some of the more, if you like, more up-to-date themes that you might wish to consider. So that's all I've got for now, but hopefully that's given you an idea of how and why we went about it and how we implemented it at the time.
Rob, thank you very much. Would
Okay.
you mind unsharing your screen? That's fantastic.
Is that right?
Now I'm going. We've got Stuart to welcome from Bays, Stuart Young. If I could ask John to bring there is the presentation, as if by magic. Stuart, are you with us? Are you unmuted?
I'm unmuted, and hopefully you can all hear me.
Well, I can hear you loud and clear, which I hope everyone else can. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted that Stuart Young is able to join us from Bays. He's very kindly agreed to take us through a few slides with regard to the roadmap to recovery. And as I say, the idea is to listen to what Stuart has to say, understand the roadmap to recovery, and then see what we can do to update the client commitments that Rob's just alluded to make sure that we're completely up to date in terms of the Constructing Excellence agenda. So, Stuart, thank you for your time. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you, Andrew, for the invitation. I hope this has helped a colleague. So, just to kind of give some brief context, I am based in the construction unit at Bays and lead on the stakeholder engagement and management. So, at the moment, working very intensively on COVID responsiveness, working across government with IPA, Treasury, Cabinet Office, Number 10, all the key departments, plus also part of the construction industry task force daily calls that have produced the roadmap to recovery. So thanks for your time, and apologies I can't even shortly. I've got to go off to a call just before 12 with the Treasury, so apologies for that. So just to kind of take you through this, so this is a presentation, as I say, that was produced by the Construction Leadership Council. So apologies if you can hear a couple of puppies in the background. It's my dogs who seem to be taking it their moment to bark. So if we move on to slide 2, so basically this is just kind of setting out a summary of what the recovery plan is. So just to be clear on this, it was a set of industry proposals to government, which the government welcomed, and obviously we was involved in kind of shaping it as well. It was not government policy, and we're now working in conjunction with industry, the task force, and government departments in terms of taking the various proposals in plan forward. So you'll see there's 3 particular phases to the plan. It's around restart, reset, reinvent. So if we just go on to the next slide, slide 3. Thank you. This is just basically setting out the outcomes and benefits to the slide. I don't propose probably to go through those in detail, but obviously happy to circulate the presentation after the meeting. Just go on to next slide. This is about embedding the CLC objectives in the recovery plan. So I'll come on to this a bit later, but the membership of the task force was comprised primarily from membership of the CLC. So it's basically making sure the links are kind of there between the different work streams of the CLC and the recovery plan. And again, I'll come on to that at present. But the ones you see there below in terms of skills, procurement, building safety, net zero, innovation, fair practices, they are the kind of existing work streams that have come through the CLC. If we just move forward to the next slide, please. Again, this is more the kind of the task force output. So basically the task force was established back in March. It's been meeting on a daily basis and continues to do so. It's comprised mainly of the CEOs from the kind of the main trade associations across the sector. It's chaired by Andy Mitchell, who's obviously the chair of the CLC, so it includes trade associations such as the Construction Products Association, Build UK, and ACE, and so on and so forth. And this slide here just kind of provides a snapshot of what it's accomplished across the period since March. There's been many other accomplishments. This is kind of the headline. So most of you will be aware that there's been a number of iterations of the site operating procedures guidance, which has generally received quite strong backing across the industry. And as well as what's on here, we've also had fortnightly meetings with the Construction Minister, Nadeem Sahawi, who's provided kind of that interaction between government at the ministerial level and the task force. And there have also been fortnightly advisory group phone calls, which some of you may have been on, and that's kind of provided an opportunity for Andy to set out to a broader audience beyond just the task force of what the task force have been up to in those weeks in question. And obviously that slide also kind of captures the loan finance. So we know that a lot of the sector have also used and accessed the the job retention scheme and other schemes in place. And you will have seen the announcements recently around those and the extension in particular to the job retention scheme until the end of October. And obviously other announcements like reverse charge VAT. If we just move on to the next slide, please. So again, this just captures the kind of the 3-stage of the industry recovery plan: restart, reset, reinvent. And what we've chosen to do there is to kind of focus that quite tightly on what we can do over the next kind of 2 years. This plan is a 2-year document, recognizing that there's not much point trying to achieve everything. If you try and do everything, you'll probably end up achieving not a lot. So we're trying to focus it on what are the key things we can add value to and what are the key issues the actual industry needs in terms of kind of returning to a new world post-COVID, with a general recognition that we won't be going back to kind of what was the situation before COVID came along. It's general kind of recognition that the industry probably won't be back up to normal business levels for quite a period of time. So how can we kind of support that? Just move on to the next slide. So in terms of taking this plan forward, these are the 4 working groups being set up. So there is a working around infrastructure, housing, domestic RMI, lead, social and commercial construction, and the remit of those individual groups are set up in that slide. It's quite kind of, we've been quite clear that industry should lead this. So you'll see that each of the working groups is led by an industry body, industry trade association. There is a government or will be a government representative on each of the groups, and not necessarily always be led by that lead government department by bay. So for example, I am on the infrastructure group and also on the local social and commercial construction group, but clearly the lead department for infrastructure would be the IPA. Those groups are in the process of being established. Some have already started. So the local social and commercial construction group has already started, and I believe the housing group has its first meeting on Friday. If you have an interest in being involved in those groups, if you know the kind of if you have the contact details of the lead organisations, please feel free to contact those directly. If you don't have their contact numbers or stroke email addresses, I'm happy for you to kind of, through Andrew, push an email through to me, and I can put you in contact with the relevant people who are chairing those groups. So for example, on the local social commercial construction, it is Hannah Vickers at ACE, and with housing, it's John Slaughter at HBF. But again, I can kind of facilitate that if that is helpful and needed. I think that brings to a close the kind of how we're taking it forward. Just the other key thing to flag, and some of you may have picked up on this, there is a very strong political drive at present on construction being driven by the Prime Minister and the Chancellor. That is in the context of the pipeline. So my understanding is there's due to be an announcement around the pipeline possibly next Thursday afternoon, around kind of a number of projects being brought forward as part of kind of accelerating the pipeline. So Prime Minister and Chancellor are very interested in this. A lot of work being done across BAE, CLG, IPA, Treasury, Number 10, Cabinet Office. Any ideas on the table at the moment? Nothing is really being seen as too stupid, but a massive amount of political will to kind of drive that forward. So I appreciate it was a real gallop going through it. Hopefully that's been helpful, and obviously I'm happy to kind of take questions. What I would caveat that with is I may not know all the answers, but if Andrew or colleagues can record them, we can take them back and try and get answers to them.
Stuart,
you.
we are recording this session. I hope you don't mind. I should have pointed that out at the start, so apologies. But before you head off to the Treasury, I would like to open up the opportunity for anyone on board today to ask a question of you. If you could raise your hand, or maybe Howard, have we got the facility in the chat box or the Q&A?
I think engage John on that. We have chat box capability.
John, have we got?
Yep. Yeah, no, absolutely. People can use the chat pane or put the hand up, whatever's
If
good.
anyone's got any questions, only Stuart's got to skate off to the Treasury any minute now.
Okay. Question from Tim then.
Okay, please do. Yep. Can we bring Tim in?
So people just have to unmute themselves and then they can speak.
Okay, Tim.
Sorry, was that me, Andrew? I was putting in broken signal line. Yeah. So Tim James from South West Business Council. Three very quick ones. Thank you, Stuart. Really helpful. The announcement next Thursday from the PM and the Chancellor is predicted to include some revisions to the planning policy and delivery. Is that something you're able to give us a quick heads up on? Number two, we are detecting a very big hole in apprenticeships in the construction industry at the moment. Something on that, I think, is absolutely an essential intervention. If you're able to communicate that to Treasury colleagues, I'm sure you've got that on your agenda. And three, if you layer into this debate not only COVID response but Brexit, and start looking at integrated supply chain, the interdependence we've got into European markets is absolutely fundamental. Somehow we need to see how that bit of the knitting is going to work.
Thank you, Tim, for those questions. So in terms of planning revisions, I've not heard anything intel on that, but it is moving at quite a pace. So just to clarify, the likely announcement next week, is my understanding so far, is around the pipeline. It's going to be an IPA announcement, so not a PM as far as well, because that could of course change. So it's an IPA announcement around the pipeline, and a large number of projects that are being brought forward. They are still being worked through at present at pace. So that's where we are at on that. In terms of apprenticeship, yes, completely. That's been an issue flagged to us quite prominently, that it's going to be a massive issue in terms of companies taking the decision to make redundancies. And as part of that, the apprenticeships will be at risk. And you might also have, for example, young graduates in year one of a year two program who could also be at risk there. So very much kind of picking up with Department of Education and looking at the moment. I can't say much more on at the moment. The reason for that is that those discussions haven't concluded yet, but we are looking at that and kind of issues around the apprenticeship levy as well. Because obviously at the moment companies are paying out for levy, but unfortunately they're not able to actually use the personnel involved. So very much aware of that. And in terms of Brexit, that is very much coming back on the agenda now. So very much aware that kind of focus today has been around COVID-19. So we are now, that is now started at pace across government in terms of bringing that engagement back into line. We haven't got down to the specifics yet, but in terms of Brexit, I would expect you to start seeing a lot of kind of increased messaging coming out on that. And I believe the Cabinet Office are currently looking at kind of a communications hub around that and what that might look like, given obviously Dexia has now been stood down. But so I suspect that at the moment I've been issuing a lot of comms around COVID-19. I suspect that will increase, but there'll be an added layer around Brexit, given that we're definitely going out of the EU at the end of December.
Stuart, thank you very much. Are there any other questions, Howard, John, in the boxes? If not, Stuart, I'm going to thank you very much for your valuable time. Thank you for joining us. What you've told us will play an invaluable part in the next part of this workshop. So I wish you well with the Treasury.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your time, everyone. Much appreciated. I hope that was helpful. Okay, Andrew, if you wanted to, obviously happy for you to share my slides after the presentation. That's helpful.
Thank you very much. We'll do that.
Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye. So, ladies and gents, there we are. We've had our opening presentations from Rob and Stuart, which I hope will have been useful in making you sort of come up with your thoughts. I also hope that maybe you've done a little bit of homework in preparation for this workshop. What we're going to do now is we're going to split the group into 6 workshops. John Savage is going to do that almost by magic in a few moments' time. We've tried to preempt these workshops. We did a little bit of work, Melissa and I, in terms of putting you into workshops. Obviously, we've only actually got about 2/3 of the people that said were coming actually present. So I'm not sure whether Melissa and I have got those workshop numbers in equal numbers, but we'll see. So what we're going to do, John's going to put us into the breakout groups. We'll spend 25 minutes chatting. Each of the facilitators will lead that, but they will then ask for a volunteer raconteur from each group, who we will then ask in 25 minutes to come back into this main room and feed back. So that's the plan. But when we get into the breakout rooms, if we could just spend a couple of minutes getting to know each other, whilst John and I behind the scenes just make sure that we've got relatively equal numbers. So we might be moving you from one to another. So don't be disappointed if all of a sudden you get moved from one group to another. But for the next 25 minutes, I'm going to leave you in the hands of your facilitators, and I'm going to be looking after design quality. So we'll see you back in 25 minutes. Thank you. Welcome back, everybody.
Hi.
I hope you found that useful. I know some groups were better populated than others. Looking at my screen, I think procurement was particularly well populated. Others were more bijou. I think sustainability was one of those. Right, the idea now, ladies and gents, is that we feed back to the main group what we all had to say. So I'm going to go through the client commitments in the order that they're written, so to speak, in terms of the chapters. So who do we have feeding back from client leadership, please?
I'm afraid you've got me. I know it's not right, but
Okay.
because we were so bijou, we had sort of people who were not greatly prepared or necessarily clients, if you like, from that point of view.
Okay.
What we felt is that there were certain things that could be looked at in light of the recovery plan, and that the sort of three sort of things like restart, reset, reinvent are actually, from a client perspective, quite interlinked. You shouldn't just look at them at 1 to 3, 0 to 12, and that sort of thing. So looking at that, we then looked at the things that were in the client guide and thought what we should change. We thought that it would be a good idea to look at moving towards a mission rather than a vision that included everyone that was actually involved in the collaboration of delivering of a project. We thought this might involve a bit more risk-taking by the client, and therefore the client should look to be a risk-taker. It should look from the client at the top of the supply chain to actually be responsible for leading change. And then we came down to look at specifics, and we thought that more contracting should be looked at on the basis of time, costs, and quality, and that perhaps things like a no blame clause should be put into contracts so that in terms of the whole of the chain, they solve their problems together to decrease non-value added costs. And that perhaps the step should be to move away from tendering to work on a preferred partner basis. Now, it's not applicable to all, but they should be maybe a move towards DMFA progressively. This might take many years, but this design for manufacturing assembly could well come in as we look with more prefabricated housing. So I think that sort of sums up what we talked about.
Okay, and this is all being recorded, isn't it? So we've got notes.
I've got it. I've got notes of it. Yeah.
Okay. So could we turn then to procurement and integration? Who's the raconteur for that, please?
Yeah, it's me, Andrew, to Tim Jones, brilliantly facilitated by Mark, of course. So we had a very lively but fairly diverse discussion. Ran out of time very quickly, so inevitably, because it was such an intelligent group. We talked about the need for UK-wide integration, so to make sure that there was a seamless agenda across the devolved assemblies. So just to mark cards on that. We looked at what best practice might look like, and we were very mindful of the fact that there's been some spectacular delivery through NHS contracts recently. How's that been achieved? Was that just because the Spirit needed to capture the moment for some very immediate procurement delivery models? I think we were persuaded that the local government procurement model has been sufficiently adjusted, and that a lot of the rule books were thrown away, frameworks were superseded, and critically, the use of local contractors achieved spectacular delivery levels, and that introduces a theme which we'll come back to in a second about the importance of local integrated supply chains and how that can cut through a lot of the bureaucratic processes. We talked a bit about behaviours and cultures and capturing this great spirit. How do we put that in a bottle and rekindle the spirit of let's just get it done? We talked about the learner interface in some detail, grave concerns which I'd raised about young people accessing this market. How do we make construction an attractive industry for the future? The fragility of apprenticeships. Are FE colleges and the private training providers doing enough? And looking at the predictions around the hole that we might experience in relevant skills, it's not just at a practical level where there's some gaps anticipated in the 18 to 30-year-olds, but looking at the experience, invariably management experience of the 55 to 65 cohort, and many of those experiences are going to be lost. So we need to look at it at a bottom-up and top-down process to make sure that we are addressing that skills gap. And then the final bit that we looked at was a very philosophical discussion around tearing down brick walls, very apposite, of course, brick and construction, etc. I won't go there. But do we need a new model in terms of how we tackle that? Still the view that there's far too much hierarchy built into the model between the client, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, etc. How does that message dissipate when you go down that chain? How do we get teams coming together much more quickly? And then the final comment, sorry Andrew, gone on too long, alliancing across the tiers might achieve much greater levels of collaboration. Team, I hope I've captured everything you said there. If I've failed, I apologise. You can shoot our facilitator.
Thank you, Tim. Could we have the raconteur for the Commitment to People group, please? Commitment to People?
It's me.
Okay.
We were Bijou. There were 3 of us, so I wasn't going to put Catherine and Nick up in front of you all. A lot of what's been said already came through our commitment to people, and I'm just picking up this. These. I know we've got these key issues, these key points, but there feels like a thread coming all the way through this, and that thread is clearly greater collaboration in order for this to work. And you just used a term, alliancing, Tim, and that's what came up in our discussion as well as a potential for a way forward. But just looking at commitment to people and the sort of things we felt were included in that was what was raised was that the new building regs are going to require a greater concentration on designers, and that's going to have an impact on that client and delivery team relationship, and those changes it's expected will cascade down through the supply chain. So we're going to need extended project and lead times. And so in order to work in this way, you've got to have a much better relationship with the clients. So collaboration is going to have to become the norm, particularly on smaller projects, that whole NEC approach. More needs to be done to help clients to understand the benefits of working in this way and what they're going to get from it. And that's where alliancing came in. Some clients still haven't invested enough in BIM and the whole digital world, which would again improve that relationship and improve the outcomes for everybody. We talked a bit about the community benefits we've got in Wales. We had Catherine working in England and Nick, who's a Wrexham local authority, so understands the community benefits. And we think that more could be done, certainly to encourage what happens in Wales more in England, but our own community benefits need boosting a bit more. Clients need to understand the benefits of working again with local supply chains and the benefits of training local people, particularly younger people. We haven't done enough to get more younger people in. So we are losing skill sets, and we were just touching on benefits of improving that relationship between clients and people when our warning came up. But I think one benefit that Catherine raised was about proactive risk management, who best should manage that and end of silo working. But again, I mean, in summary, it's collaboration, collaboration, collaboration.
Thank you, Melissa. Sustainability, please.
Paul here. We spent our 25 minutes, Robert and I, getting to know each other better and talking about the subject. There's some of the terminology, as I think Robert mentioned right at the beginning, is changing. Social value, net zero greenhouse gases, not just net zero carbon. We've obviously got the climate emergency. There's some inequality issues here, which maybe should come into here within society as well. One of the base documents that's referred to here is the Strategy for Sustainable Development, which is actually 2008. We've had the UN SDGs since, we've had the Wellbeing of Future Generations Wales Act and its goals since, so maybe that's needs a refresh in its own right. In Wales, we've got economic, social, environmental and cultural well-being, so some of these cultural messages could usefully come in. In business case work, we normally focus on the financial value in business case, but actually we should bring in other considerations and make sure that we're looking at the value to society in sustainability terms across the board as part of the business case, and decide on what's the best project to deliver, including that consideration. We touched briefly on procurement because of the link here, but we talked briefly about procuring for the outcomes we're trying to achieve, not just the construction outputs that are wanted from a building or whatever. Waste was mentioned, and maximizing waste recycling is not necessarily the most carbon efficient, so there's a balance in there. We talked about carbon, the circular economy, making sure we've covered reuse, relocation and recycle of the built assets as well. Carbon, we talked about embedded carbon as well as operational carbon, but also induced carbon. If we build loads more roads, we're probably going to get loads more cars on it. That induced carbon is something which we need to challenge. So we've got to be building the right things, build them in the right way. Swansea City Deal has got buildings as power stations as a particular project within there. So that we're, if you build enough buildings that are energy positive, actually you're building a power station at the same time and they're generating everything that they need. So some of those visions can come in. The skills agenda we talked about, one of the issues I think with the skills agenda is without a true and fairly solid vision as to where the industry is going, there's still a degree of uncertainty as to what skills it is that we need to tap into and develop further. So if DFMA and MMC becomes more mainstream than it has been, and I hope it will, then that will help inform that. We touched on the green recovery, again, trying to build the right things in the right place for the right reasons and so on as we look to recover. The natural environment, yes, we need to invest in that, but not just because for biodiversity, for carbon sequestration, for flood risk management by planting within the catchments and so on. Community benefits, we touched on briefly, Melissa's done that. Well-being focus in design, we touched on that, but also things like BREEAM. where we sort of set a target and then all we do is try and achieve that target. There's nothing incentivized within that to try and thrash the pants off that target and achieve something even more.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Rob. Design quality, Jonathan. Thank you. If you unmute yourself.
Hi all. Thanks, Andrew. We were a small group as well. I think there were 3 or 4 of us.
4, yeah.
And we kicked off partly discussing the modern methods of construction debate and BIM and decarbonisation agenda and how that can assist in rebuilding the market. Also, that is primarily been discussed at the moment as an antiviral kind of issue, the modern methods of construction, and that was a discussion point that went on to look at the client commitments paper in the design quality section. We reviewed the headline, which is about creative, functional, and sustainable, and is that the sort of right terminology today? And I brought up the 18th century, I think it was, description of firmness, commodity, and delight, which still works really. That the 3 aspects to design that create something that is both functional and beautiful and works for the future and today. The how we do it question came about, and taking forward design as an agenda item is something that's often, I think, missed at the moment. There certainly haven't been very many design-led competitions. We discussed towards the end of the discussion, the London Garden Bridge was the last big one that I can remember being discussed, which perhaps didn't end well. But it's not a debate that happens that much in the market at the moment. It tends to be, how do we get something built? We were discussing the change in technology. The BIM cave came up as a point of discussion, which is, I think, also the same as digital twins, and the advantage for clients in driving that agenda forward so that they can see what they're getting beforehand and embed the design quality in it at the right time, rather than in the construction stage, so that early aspirations are met. We talked about the process of testing. I think, again, that's in, I've got the design quality page up of the client commitments here, which is talked about third-party design reviews, which is something that happens in the NHS in Wales, where I am, at sort of beginning, middle, and end of projects, and tests the projects' commitments to design, both pre-construction and after construction. From a personal knowledge, the early stage one is the one that gets a lot of value into projects, and often it gets missed in developing designs. And I think something that occurred to me sort of as we were finishing off really was about the program. The digital twin BIM development requires, has a big advantage of building a building before you build it, but it needs the time and design to do it. And certainly I remember when I was starting off as a young architect in the industry, that programs used to be horizontal. Remember that A3s used to be horizontal in programs, and now they're vertical. And design gets, or the stage at which you put together your brief is a very short one, and gets merged imperceptibly into the construction debate, and then gets lost. And it'd be nice to see more time allowed at the early stages of the project for doing that, which tends to happen in the public sector to some extent in NHS because of the business case which proposals procedure which Paul was just talking about, which then focus on a 5-case business model, which tends to be commercial, financial, and economic drivers at the forefront. And amongst all those things, there is some design aspiration, but it does tend to be not spoken about so much.
Jonathan, thank you for that. Thank you. Last but by no means least, health and safety spokesman, please.
That's going to be me. So it's me, Keith, and Balbia in a little compact and bijou health and safety discussion. And I'll whiz through this. Sorry, I was just looking at my slightly confused notes. Basically, it's it's okay as a section. but it focuses far too much on slip, trips and falls, and not enough. Although whilst it mentions occupational health, there's nowhere near enough stuff in there about well-being in its broader sense, particularly around mental health and even financial well-being and the different anxieties and stress that have been highlighted, particularly because of COVID-19, but just generally things that are discussed much more than they have been since the document was put together 5 or 6 years ago. So that needs updating. Keith and I are going to have a chat about that, because there's a document that Keith is hopefully going to be able to share with me, which we might be able to crib from Graham's. But there were quite a few other bits. It's worth noting that health and safety isn't just about what happens on site. It's the route to the site, it's the impact on the community around it, and there's crossover between what's been discussed so far around sustainability and and obviously procurement as well. Because
have we lost you, Andrew? Andrew?
Sorry, yeah. How much have you not heard?
Just the last few seconds.
Okay, so sorry, I don't know what happened there. So there's some things around CDM updates need to be covered off if we did a review. There's lots of things around construction logistic programs. Construction logistic planning. So TfL have pushed through things like clocks and fours. That's not in the health and safety commitment, and that needs to be included. And we need to apply the lessons learned because of the last 3-4 months with the virus as well.
Okay, thank you, Andrew, very much.
Okay.
Ladies and gents, thank you very much for your input. I hope you found the last hour and a half useful and worthwhile. Let me tell you what we intend to do. We're going to take these notes back in-house as CE Wales, CE Midlands and CE Southwest, share it with the national organisation and decide where we go from here. What we will do initially is share the 2 presentations. Thank you to you, Rob, for your involvement, both historically and today. Stuart, in his absence, thank you to him for giving up his valuable time. Where this goes from here, if I'm honest, I'm not sure. We've got to analyse the information that we've received and decide then what we do with it. But the aim is to produce a revised version of the construction client's best practice guide. So are there any comments or questions before I thank everybody and wish you a good day? I'd like to thank Howard and John for hosting. I'd like to thank the facilitators for their part in this morning, which I'm hopeful you all found of interest and of value. So I don't think I've got any. John, can you see any comments or questions?
So no, some comments. A great comment from Andrew about the currency that we use to define success.
Yeah.
Very good comment. So look at that in the chat pane, people.
Okay.
No other questions as such.
Okay. Well, thank you, John. Thank you, everyone else. I wish you a good day. I'm going on to my next online conference. See you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.